There is a specific texture to the silence you prefer. It is not the silence of peace, exactly, but the silence of a room where the curtains are drawn against a too bright afternoon. You likely find yourself gravitating toward music that sits in a minor key, or weather that forces the world to slow down. When the sky turns grey, something in your chest unknots. A subtle tension, one you were barely aware of holding, finally releases. It feels less like sadness and more like a return to baseline. When joy appears, flashy, bright, high energy, it does not feel inviting. It feels intrusive. It feels like a metabolic demand on your nervous system that you cannot meet. You might notice that when things are going too well, you feel a distinct somatic itch, a need to seek out a small tragedy, a sad memory, or a cynical perspective to bring the energy back down. You aren't doing this to hurt yourself. You are doing it because the high altitude of happiness makes you dizzy. It feels volatile. There is a sense of gravity in this state that feels secure. While others are exhausted by sorrow, you seem to metabolize it efficiently. You can sit in it for hours, drifting, feeling a strange warmth indistinguishable from comfort. It is a biological preference for the shadows, a deep suspicion of the light. But this preference is not just a personality quirk or an aesthetic choice. It is a highly specific, repetitive signal being fired by a nervous system that has learned to interpret safety in a very particular, counterintuitive way. And it begs the difficult question: if this heavy, muted state feels like safety to your body, what exactly does your nervous system think is attacking it? The world looks at your quietude and sees a medical emergency. Because modern social dynamics equate mental health with high arousal states, excitement, productivity, outward enthusiasm, your default setting is read as a malfunction. You have likely been told, perhaps since childhood, that you are too sensitive, too intense, or simply hard to be around when you aren't masking. People attempt to rescue you from the very state that keeps you functioning. They offer solutions to problems you do not actually feel you have. They try to inject sunlight into the room you have carefully dimmed. This interaction creates a bizarre dynamic where you must often perform a specific type of distress to justify your silence, or conversely, perform a counterfeit happiness just to get them to stop asking, "What's wrong?" They label this pessimism. They assume you look at the future and see only failure, but that is an error in translation. You do not necessarily expect the worst because you want it to happen. You expect the worst because the worst is predictable. The worst is a known quantity. Optimism, by contrast, requires a leap of faith into the unknown, and to your physiology, the unknown is indistinguishable from a threat. So you remain the heavy one in the group, the one who brings the mood down. You become the repository for the group's anxieties, the person who holds the gravity so everyone else can float. You accept this role because it aligns with your internal temperature. But while you defend your right to be melancholy, you likely miss what this constant friction is doing to your reserves. It is metabolically expensive to live in a world that demands you burn fuel you do not possess. And this social misalignment is masking a much deeper, more biological debt that has been accumulating in the background for years. There is a specific lethargy that settles into the bones of the melancholy prone, a heaviness that sleep does not touch. You likely wake up after a full night of rest and still feel a distinct magnetic drag in your limbs, as if gravity is pulling harder on you than on anyone else. This is not ordinary tiredness. It is the accumulated debt of a chronic regulatory strategy. We tend to think of melancholy as a passive state, a lack of energy, a void. But biologically, it is an active, high-friction containment process. Your nervous system is engaging in a continuous, low-grade inhibition. To keep the world at a safe, muted distance, to maintain that grayscale internal environment you prefer, your body is constantly applying the brakes. Imagine driving a car with one foot firmly pressing down on the brake pedal while the other tries to maintain speed. You are moving forward, but the mechanical friction is immense. The engine runs hot. The wear on the parts is accelerated. Over time, this friction manifests as a pervasive emotional callousing. You find that your range of motion narrows. The peaks of experience are cut off first. They are simply too metabolically expensive to reach. Then the valleys become less sharp, dulling into a flat, aching hum. You lose the texture of your life. Days blend into a singular monochromatic loop. You might find yourself unable to remember specific events from a month ago because nothing stood out enough to encode a distinct memory. The brain stops recording high-definition data because it is trying to save space. This is the metabolic cost of repression. You are spending immense amounts of neural capacity to inhibit your natural responses. Every time an impulse to connect, to scream, or to laugh rises up, a counterforce slams it back down to baseline. This internal collision happens thousands of times a day, unnoticed, draining your battery before you even step out the door. You interpret this exhaustion as a personal failing or a lack of drive. But the exhaustion is not a malfunction. It is a calculated allocation of resources. Your body is making you too tired to participate in a world it has deemed unsafe. To understand why a biological organism would systematically reject pleasure, we must look past the concept of addiction and examine the architecture of prediction. Your brain is not designed to make you happy. It is designed to keep you alive. And to the primitive, subcortical parts of your neurology, survival is synonymous with predictability. From a neurocomputational perspective, joy is a high-error state. It is volatile. It is usually dependent on external variables, a person, an achievement, a stroke of luck, that can change at any moment. To your nervous system, happiness looks like a fluctuating stock market, high potential yield, but terrifyingly high risk. If you accept the joy, you become vulnerable to the crash. You introduce a prediction error gap, where reality could suddenly deviate from your expectations. Melancholy, by contrast, is a low-error state. It is the emotional equivalent of a savings account with zero interest but zero risk. When you are already sad, you cannot be disappointed. When you are already anticipating the worst, disaster cannot ambush you. You are essentially prepaying the emotional tax of living. You are grieving the loss of the moment while you are still in it, so that when the moment actually ends, the blow has already been softened. This mechanism is often rooted in a dorsal vagal response, the oldest, most primitive part of your parasympathetic nervous system. This is the shutdown state. In nature, this is the play-dead reflex used when an animal is cornered and cannot fight or flee. It lowers the heart rate, drops the body temperature, and numbs the senses. By retreating into melancholy, you are partially engaging this shutdown valve. You are artificially inducing a hibernation state to conserve energy in an environment your body reads as hostile. You are not addicted to the sadness itself. You are addicted to the certainty it provides. You have learned that the floor is the only place where you cannot fall, but this creates a neurological paradox. The mechanism is designed to shield you from the pain of unexpected loss. Yet, to maintain this shield, you must voluntarily sustain the very feeling of loss you are trying to avoid. You are engaging in a permanent, preemptive mourning for a life that is still happening. And this raises a critical, unresolved issue. If this mechanism is designed to conserve your energy, why does maintaining it feel so incredibly heavy? You have likely constructed an entire identity around this heaviness. You view yourself as someone with a darker disposition, a realist, or perhaps a tortured soul. You may even take a quiet pride in your capacity to endure depths that others cannot. You tell yourself that this is simply who you are, that you were born with a lower emotional thermostat than the rest of the species. This is a fundamental categorization error. You are not a sad person. You are a person operating under a high-threat assessment protocol. The melancholy you feel is not the fabric of your soul. It is the thickness of your armor. You do not live in this darkened state because you enjoy the architecture. You live here because at some point, your nervous system decided that the outside world was too bright, too loud, and too sharp to be engaged with naked skin. This is not a personality trait. It is a callus. A callus does not form because the skin wants to be hard. It forms because the friction at that specific contact point is constant. Your melancholy is the callus that has formed over the parts of you that were once too soft, too open, or too easily disappointed. You have mistaken the shield for the soldier. You have confused the wall you built for the territory you defend. The tragedy is not that you are broken. The tragedy is that the defense mechanism works so well that it has become indistinguishable from the self. You have worn the mask of safety for so long that the face underneath has begun to take its shape. And now you are faced with a terrifying reality. To let go of the sadness would not just feel like losing a coping mechanism, it would feel like losing yourself. This safety protocol does not stay contained within the boundaries of your mood. Once your nervous system identifies low arousal and predictable disappointment as the only safe coordinates, it begins to map this logic onto every external structure of your life. The mechanism replicates itself, fractal-like, until your environment perfectly mirrors your internal restriction. Consider how this manifests in your relationships. You likely find yourself deeply suspicious of new affection. When someone offers you unmitigated praise or unsolicited kindness, your immediate reflex is not gratitude, it is contraction. You wonder what they want. You wonder what they are hiding. You scan the interaction for the inevitable flaw that will prove your skepticism right. This is not because you do not want to be loved. It is because real intimacy requires you to be visible, and to your survival brain, visibility is synonymous with being a target. Consequently, you might find yourself unconsciously drawn to partners who are emotionally unavailable, inconsistent, or mildly critical. This is not masochism, it is a search for congruence. A partner who keeps you at arm's length reinforces your internal belief that the world is cold and connection is scarce. It hurts, yes, but it makes sense. It aligns with your baseline data. There is no cognitive dissonance. A partner who loves you openly, however, creates a terrifying discrepancy between your internal map, I am unsafe/unlovable, and the external territory, I am being loved. To resolve this tension, you might sabotage the connection, picking a fight, withdrawing into silence, or becoming rigid, just to bring the relationship back down to a temperature that feels familiar. You break the happiness before it can break you. This pattern bleeds into your professional life. You may be highly competent, perhaps even a perfectionist, but you likely have a ceiling on how much success you will allow yourself to metabolize. Success brings attention, it raises expectations, it creates a new baseline that you must now defend. To a nervous system already running a high-friction inhibition strategy, the idea of more responsibility or more visibility feels like a threat to your limited energy reserves. So you engage in defensive underachievement. You stay in a job you have outgrown because you know the ropes. You don't apply for the promotion because the unknown variables of a new role trigger that dorsal shutdown response. Or, if you do achieve something great, you immediately discount it. You attribute it to luck, or you focus hypercritically on the one minor error, effectively neutralizing the dopamine hit of the win. You strip the victory of its emotional nutrients so that you don't get used to the taste of winning. Because if you get used to winning, losing will hurt more. Even your leisure time is colonized by this mechanism. Look at the media you consume. You might find yourself bypassing comedy or light-hearted entertainment in favor of dark dramas, true crime, or aggressive music. When you have a free evening, you do not use it to charge up, you use it to come down. You seek out external stimuli that match your internal heaviness. Watching a tragedy on screen resonates with the somatic tragedy in your body. It provides a container for the free-floating melancholy. It validates the feeling without you having to explain it. It is a form of self-medication, using the darkness of others to numb the sensitivity of your own system. And perhaps the most insidious application is in your relationship with the future. You do not plan, you brace. You treat the future not as a landscape of potential, but as a series of incoming projectiles. You mentally rehearse every possible catastrophe, financial ruin, health collapse, social humiliation, under the guise of being prepared. You tell yourself you are being pragmatic, but functionally, you are forcing your body to live through the trauma of events that have not happened yet. You are paying the interest on a debt you haven't even borrowed. You are trapped in a closed loop of confirmation bias. Your internal state demands a muted, heavy world to feel safe. You subconsciously curate your life to ensure it remains muted and heavy. The world confirms your suspicion that it is a dark place, and your nervous system says, "See? I told you so. Stay down." The bill for this protection eventually comes due, and the currency is your capacity to feel anything at all. The most expensive aspect of this survival strategy is that your nervous system does not possess a selective mute button. You cannot inhibit the frequency of sorrow without also damping the frequency of delight. When you flatten the sine wave of your emotional experience to avoid the troughs, you inevitably shave off the peaks. The cost of constant safety is a pervasive anesthesia. You wanted a life without sharp edges, but you have created a life without texture. By prepaying the grief, you have inadvertently mortgaged the joy. The moments that should have been transcendent, a sudden realization of love, a creative breakthrough, a sensory masterpiece, are experienced through a layer of thick glass. You see them, you intellectually understand their value, but you cannot feel them reverberate in your chest. You are safe, yes, but you are also chemically bored. Physiologically, this state of chronic breaking creates a cumulative debt in the body. The constant, low-level vigilance required to maintain melancholy acts as a corrosive agent. It is a slow-motion inflammation. Your muscles remain subtly braced for an impact that never arrives, leading to chronic tension patterns and a diaphragm that has forgotten how to fully expand. You are breathing into a cage of your own making. Furthermore, this creates a biological atrophy known as use-dependent plasticity. Because you rarely allow your system to spike into high arousal joy, the neural pathways that facilitate those states begin to degrade. It becomes physically harder to feel happy because the bridge to that state has effectively rotted from disuse. This is the ultimate irony of the defense mechanism. It was designed to protect you from suffering, yet it guarantees a baseline of suffering. You avoided the acute, sharp pain of potential heartbreak, but in exchange, you accepted the dull, chronic ache of partial existence. You traded the risk of being destroyed for the certainty of slowly withering. You have spent years guarding an empty room, so vigilant against the thief that you never stopped to ask if there was anything left inside worth stealing. The tragedy you feared was not an event, it was the silence where an event should have been. There is no sudden epiphany that dissolves this structure. Understanding the mechanism does not disable it. Your nervous system is not interested in your intellectual insights, it is interested in your survival history. And history tells it that silence is safer than noise, and that the shadows are safer than the light. To dismantle this would not feel like healing. It would feel like recklessness. It would require you to violate your own prime directive. You would have to voluntarily step into the high error zones of joy and trust, fully aware that you have no armor for the crash. You would have to accept that the anxiety you feel when things go right is not a warning signal to stop, but the growing pain of a capacity you haven't used in years. For now, the weight remains. The instinct to dim the room will rise tomorrow, just as it did today. You will still feel the urge to preemptively grieve the things you love. The difference is that now, when the heaviness settles in, you will know it is not a fundamental truth about the universe. It is simply a noise your body makes when it is afraid. You are left standing in the doorway of a room you have lived in for a lifetime, holding the handle, aware for the first time that the door is not locked. The exit is right there. But walking through it requires a terrifying trade you may not be ready to make. The question is not whether you want to be happy. The question is, are you finally safe enough to stop protecting yourself?